Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The US President Donald Trump has said he is open to a three-way summit with Russia and Ukraine in Turkey after Monday's talks in Istanbul ended without a ceasefire deal but resulted in a prisoner swap of over 1,000 fighters each and the return of 6,000 bodies of fallen soldiers. Gaza's health ministry has reported 51 deaths across the enclave in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, the UN has called for an independent investigation after over 31 Palestinians were killed and more than 100 injured at food distribution sites run by the Israel and US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which operates outside of the UN oversight. Trump rejected any uranium enrichment for Iran under a new nuclear deal, blaming former US President Joe Biden for inaction, while Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi defended its peaceful program in Cairo during talks with the IAEA chief. President Zelensky has met with Norway's Prime Minister to strengthen air defense and intensify sanctions against Russia. He also held crucial talks with NATO's Rutte. Additionally, Zelensky met Romania's new president to drive peace efforts and demand tougher sanctions on Moscow. Meanwhile, Ukrainian strikes caused massive power cuts across Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions. Polls have opened now for the South Korea's snap presidential election as the country votes for a new leader after ex-president Yoon Suk-yeol was impeached over his abortive declaration of martial law, with early voters lining up in Seoul to cast their ballots. Trump administration has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn a lower court ruling that blocked mass federal layoffs as part of his plan to downsize the government. The Ninth Circuit Court has also rejected Trump's appeal, calling his move an unprecedented overreach. The suspect has been detained and faces charges for throwing gasoline bombs at a pro-Israeli rally in Boulder, Colorado, injuring a dozen people. Authorities discovered 16 gasoline-filled Molotov cocktails nearby, along with a gas canister in his vehicle. He planned the attack for over a year and used Molotov cocktails because his immigration status blocked him from buying guns. The US has congratulated Polish nationalist Karol Nawrocki on his presidential election win, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio praising Poland's support for a stronger military and border security. Russia submitted a harsh set of terms at the ceasefire talks with Ukraine in Turkey. Russia has demanded that Kyiv accept neutrality, limit its military, and permanently drop aspiration to join the NATO. The Russian memorandum also called for recognition of Russian control over Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, a ban on Western arms and intelligence aid, and a full lifting of sanctions. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed Russia's proposal for a 2 to 3 day partial ceasefire, saying that Moscow only wants a short pause in fighting. The talks, which lasted just over an hour, failed to produce a ceasefire agreement. However, both sides did commit to a large-scale prisoner swap, including at least 1,000 military personnel each, with an additional swap of 200 possible. They also have agreed to exchange the bodies of 6,000 fallen soldiers. Zelensky said that Russia's goal is to continue the war and is now urging US President Donald Trump to approve tougher sanctions to pressure Moscow into a full ceasefire. Let's listen in to what Zelensky had to say.
Вони готові на ceasefire 2-3 дні, щоб забирати вбитих з поля бою. Я вважаю, що ідіоти, тому що, в принципі, ceasefire для того, щоб не було вбитих. Тобто ви бачите, бачите настрій. Тобто для них це питання просто невеличкої паузи в війні. Тому дуже хочеться, щоб наші американські партнери все ж таки сильними кроками спрямували пакет санкцій. І тому для нас дуже важливо ще раз підкреслити, як на останній нашій розмові з президентом Трампом, що якщо в цей раз Стамбул буде щодо припинення вогню не рухатись вперед, то повинні бути сильні кроки від Штатів, передусім пакет санкцій.
Despite the impasse, the White House had said that Trump is open to meeting both Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Turkey if such a summit can help move talks forward. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has offered to host that meeting. Let's listen into what the White House press secretary had to say.
The President is suggesting that it's high time that leaders, President Erdogan, President Trump, President Putin and President Zelensky meet in Istanbul. Is that something that President Trump would support and would be partaking?
Well, the president has said he's open to it if it comes to that, but he wants both of these leaders and both sides to sit down at the table together. And we saw them do that at the urging of President Trump today. But as for how the president feels about those talks and what took place there, I'll let him speak on that.
Meanwhile, Russia's lead negotiator Vladimir Medinsky confirmed he met with Ukraine's defense minister before the wider talks began. Moscow, he said, is focused on a long-term settlement, not a temporary halt in combat. Elsewhere, officials say Russian attacks killed at least 5 civilians in eastern Ukraine in the last 24 hours. This came after the ceasefire talks in Turkey. Meanwhile, Ukraine has remained firm in its stance. The Ukrainian side has stated that there would be no recognition of Russian land grabs, no limits on its military, and no peace deal without a full, unconditional ceasefire. Kyiv says it expects Moscow to respond to its own peace proposal by the end of June. Meanwhile, as the ceasefire talks were going on, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met key international partners at the NATO Eastern Flank Summit in Lithuania. Zelensky sat down with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, thanking the alliance for its steadfast support. In a social media post, he said he briefed Rutte on recent agreements reached in Istanbul over prisoner exchanges with Russia and the return of Ukrainian children. He also met with Norwegian Prime Minister to discuss continued support for Ukraine, including strengthening air defense systems, boosting investment in Ukraine's defense industry, and increasing pressure on Russia through additional sanctions. Zelensky also held talks with Romania's newly elected president, Nicu Dan, congratulating him on his election victory. The two leaders discussed diplomatic efforts to achieve peace in Ukraine, recent negotiations with Russia in Istanbul, and the need to toughen sanctions against Moscow to curb its military production. Now we have a guest joining us, Stephen Nagy. He's a professor of politics and international studies from International Christian University, Tokyo, Japan. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. What do Russia's punitive peace terms reveal about its real intentions, peace or prolonged dominance in Ukraine?
Thanks for having me. So it's really not about peace. Russia has not changed its position fundamentally from the position it laid out at the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, and its position today is really maximalistic, understanding that it does have short-term to mid-term momentum on the front line. It is positioned its economy in terms of a wartime economy, and in terms of its leadership, the leadership is consolidated behind Vladimir Putin to pursue its long-term goals of fundamentally not just dominating the Ukraine, but creating a security arrangement with the United States. Ultimately, that is Vladimir Putin and Russia's long-term goal is establishing some kind of mutual security understanding, whether that's a sphere of influence understanding of security or similar in Russia's pursuit of some kind of settlement over the long term.
And Professor, building on what you just said, with Donald Trump expressing openness to meeting both Putin and Zelensky in Turkey, could this signal a breakthrough?
I don't think it'll signal a breakthrough for probably 3 reasons. First, Vladimir Putin's long-term intention really is to again establish dialogue and a security agreement with the United States that addresses Russia's long-term security concerns about NATO expansion. Second, I think that the security establishment within the United States looks at this possibility very negatively, understanding that a sphere of influence approach or agreement for Russia would reward its aggression towards Ukraine and would likely result in further Russian expansion into Eastern Europe. A third, and ultimately it's up to the Ukrainians. Are the Ukrainians willing to give up the 4 regions of eastern Ukraine as well as Crimea and be subject to Russian domination? And ultimately the Ukrainians, I don't think, are in that position, are willing to accept these terms. So it's really difficult to find a solution whether Mr. Trump is at the table in Turkey or not.
And Professor, speaking of Ukraine, Zelensky has urged Trump to approve tougher sanctions. Can international economic pressure realistically force Moscow into a ceasefire, according to you?
It's probably unlikely. Russia has created a wartime economy. It understands that it needs to use its energy resources to work with the global south and use that as an avenue for revenue. It's signed informally agreements with China to deliver energy resources to China in return for material support through third countries for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And ultimately, I think that these ties will continue to deepen as long as Russia maintains the status quo or deepens, albeit slowly, its engagement and its territorial grabs in Ukraine. Only if the United States and all European powers, as well as other developing countries, completely cut off or put sanctions on Russia, will there be an effect. But still, there's opportunities for Russia to have that hard income coming in from China and others, making it having the ability to, again, continue to prosecute this war of aggression against Ukraine.
And moving forward, I'd like to also about the international community's role in this. How should the international community interpret Russia's demand for Ukrainian troop withdrawal before agreeing to a ceasefire?
Well, I think people that do follow Russia's long-term patterns of behavior understand it has a maximalist approach to negotiation, and its demands really are about subjugating Ukraine and bringing Ukraine into a Russian empire that's dominated by Moscow. It's not going to happen. The Ukrainians are not going to step back from fighting for their land. They view themselves as an autonomous sovereign state with its own culture, its own history, and its own government system, and they want to pursue that sovereignty moving forward. And I don't think that Russia's demands will be accepted by Ukraine, and they may be accepted by some members of the international community, but in general, I think many countries view Russia's demands as unacceptable, but perhaps unfortunately something that Ukraine will have to accept in one form or the other because of the power asymmetry that exists between Moscow and Kiev.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Is Russia's partial truce offer a genuine step towards de-escalation, or according to you, do you think that Zelensky suggests just a ploy for a short pause in fighting?
Well, I do think it's Russia's offer is very much about putting on the table its maximalist demands, and we should be clear that for Russia, Ukraine is part of it's part of the broader equation of how Russia is looking at its long-term security, and it would like to come to the table with Donald Trump, find a way to create a new international order that addresses Russia's security concerns with the United States and with Donald Trump. It wants to, again, prevent the expansion of NATO. It wants to prevent Ukraine and other Eastern European countries from joining NATO and even perhaps the European Union, understanding that these European countries, whether it's the Ukraine or others, when they join these institutions, that they will be more transparent, there'll be less corruption, they will Europeanize in many ways fundamental characteristics that I think go against the nature of Russia and Vladimir Putin's state that really focuses on non-transparent forms of governance, really flawed democracy that doesn't have freedom of press, and focuses on keeping power in a small group of individuals rather than distributed through society.
Thank you very much, Professor Stephen Nagy, for joining us. And now we move on to our next story. 3 Palestinians have been reported killed and dozens more wounded near a US-backed aid distribution site in Gaza, according to local medics. The Israeli military acknowledged the incident, saying troops fired warning shots at individuals approaching their position about a kilometer from the site. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which operates the center, denies that any casualties occurred at or near the facility. This comes just a day after a separate incident near the same site reportedly left at least 31 Palestinians dead. Witnesses, including humanitarian groups, say Israeli forces opened fire at civilians gathered to collect aid. The Israeli military denies this, calling the reports false and blames Hamas for spreading misinformation. The GHF has also described the claims as fabricated. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for an immediate and independent investigation into the deaths, stating he is appalled by the reports. Israel's foreign ministry sharply criticized Guterres for not condemning Hamas. Meanwhile, ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas remain stalled. A Palestinian official involved in the negotiations says Hamas continues to engage with Egyptian and Qatari mediators. Israel says it remains open to a temporary truce to secure the release of hostages, but insists the war will continue until Hamas is removed from Gaza. Israel intercepted a missile fired from Yemen on Monday. According to the Israeli army, sirens sounded across multiple areas, including Jerusalem. As the missile was shot down mid-air, Houthi rebels claimed responsibility, saying they targeted Ben Gurion International Airport near Tel Aviv. Loud explosions were heard overhead, but no damage or injuries were reported. This marks the latest in series of long-range attacks launched by the Iran-backed group since the Gaza war began last October. Here's what the Houthi military spokesperson had to say.
نفذت القوات الصاروخية في القوات المسلحة اليمنية عملية عسكرية استهدفت مطار اللد في منطقة يافا المحتلة، وذلك بصاروخ باليستي نوع ذي الفقار، وقد حققت العملية هدفها بنجاح بفضل الله، وأجبرت 4 ملايين صهيوني على الهروب إلى الملاجئ ووقف حركة الملاحة في المطار.
Israel responded with a powerful strike on Sana'a International Airport in Yemen, destroying the last civilian plane meant for Hajj pilgrims. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu blamed Iran for backing the Houthis, calling them a symptom of a larger threat. The tensions continue to escalate between Israel and the Houthis, with no sign of de-escalation despite past ceasefires. In a major development in the Colorado attack, a federal prosecutor says the suspect accused of hurling Molotov cocktails at a crowd gathered in support of Israeli hostages in Gaza is now facing charges of attempted murder and a hate crime. Let's hear from the acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Colorado.
My office has charged Mohammed Sabri Solomon, age 45, with the commission of a hate crime. Mr. Solomon stated that he had been planning this attack for a year, and he acted because he hated what he called the Zionist group. And when he was interviewed about the attack, he said he wanted them all to die. He had no regrets, and he would go back and do it again. He said that he had previously tried to purchase a firearm, but resorted to the Molotov cocktails when he could not purchase a gun because he was not a legal citizen.
Boulder County District Attorney Michael Dougherty has also weighed in on the incident. Let's listen to what he had to say.
As you heard from the U.S. Attorney, the U.S. Attorney's Office will be prosecuting the hate crime against the defendant. Our office will be prosecuting the attempted murder charges and related charges at the state level.
And President Donald Trump has condemned the attack, calling it a terrible tragedy. In a post on Truth Social, Trump blamed the incident on immigration policies under former President Joe Biden. U.S. President Donald Trump insists that any Iran deal would not allow any uranium enrichment. On his Truth Social account, Trump rejected reports that the U.S. proposal permits limited enrichment. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran will soon respond to the U.S. offer. The proposal mediated by Oman seeks to limit Iran's nuclear activity while allowing low-level enrichment for civilian use. Here's what the Iranian Foreign Minister had to say.
پاسخ خودمون رو و پاسخ مناسب رو به زودی خواهیم داد. پاسخی که مبتنی بر اصول جمهوری اسلامی ایران، منافع ملی مردم ایران و حقوق مردم ایران هست. و مسلماً هیچ توافقی وجود نخواهد داشت مگر اینکه به غنیسازی در ایران و ادامه غنیسازی احترام گذاشته بشه و غنیسازی ادامه پیدا بکنه.
An Iranian diplomat has also told Reuters that Iran is poised to reject the deal, calling it a non-starter that does not protect Iran's interests. According to Axios, the U.S. plan would allow Iran to enrich uranium up to 3%, enough for nuclear reactors but not bombs. Trump's administration calls the offer acceptable, but Iran demands full sanctions relief and continues to reject any restrictions on enrichment. Negotiations remain tense as both sides hold firm positions on this long-standing nuclear dispute. Now we move on to North America. The Trump administration is racing against time, calling on trading partners to deliver their best deals as it pushes to conclude a wave of trade negotiations in just 5 weeks. A draft letter from the U.S. Trade Representative's office reveals Washington's intent to fast-track discussions launched on April 9th, when President Donald Trump temporarily halted his controversial Liberation Day tariffs following a sharp market backlash. That 90-day pause expires on July 8th. Meanwhile, talks between India and the United States could soon deliver a breakthrough. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says both sides have found common ground, and a final round of in-person negotiations is slated for this week in New Delhi. Let's take a listen to his remarks.
And we've managed, I think, to be in a very, very good place, and you should expect a deal between the United States and India in the not-too-distant future, because I think we found a place that really works for both countries. We would like market access. We would like our businesses to have reasonable access to the markets. Now, in exchange for that, what India is going to want is they're going to want certain key markets that they're going to want to make sure that they have special access to the American marketplace.
In Europe, Britain's Trade Minister Jonathan Reynolds is set to meet U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer as both nations struggle to finalize a deal complicated by fresh U.S. tariffs on steel. And legal challenges continue to shadow the Trump administration's tariff strategy. The White House is now asking an appeals to court to put a temporary hold on a second ruling that claims President Trump overstepped his powers by imposing widespread tariffs. Officials argued that the verdict could undermine sensitive trade talks still in progress. Now we move on to Asia. South Koreans have started voting in a crucial presidential election, exactly 6 months after former leader Yoon Suk-yeol sparked political turmoil by declaring martial law. In the most recent developments, former President Yoon Suk-yeol and his wife Kim Kyun-hee voted at a school close to their home in Seoul. Early morning voters, including elderly residents in Seoul's Munrae-dong, were among the first to cast their ballots. Millions have already voted early, with over a third of registered voters participating in advance ballots last week, according to the National Election Commission. All polls show Liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung leading by a significant margin. The latest Gallup survey places him at 49% favorability, while conservative Kim Moon-soo trails with 35%. Voters are focused on the aftermath of the martial law declaration, which left South Korea without effective leadership during the early months of U.S. President Donald Trump's second term. Political experts say this election is seen as a referendum on the previous administration. The martial law declaration and Yoon's impeachment have divided the conservative base and swayed moderate voters. Yoon's impeachment, following his military deployment to parliament, makes him the second conservative president in a row to be removed from office after Park Geun-hye in 2017. Let's hear what voters have to say.
이제 서민들을 좀 생각해주는 그 대통령이 됐으면 좋겠어요. 우리나라
12월 3일 쿠데타도 청산을 해야 될 것 같고, 그래서 이제 정권을 바꿔가지고 또 한번 새로운 나라가 되도록 해보려고 나왔습니다.
Now we move on to Africa. At least 30 people were killed in a Sunday attack on a military camp in central Mali, according to security sources and local officials, who warned that the death toll may rise. The assault, believed to have been carried out by jihadists, targeted the Boulkessi army base near the border with Burkina Faso. In a separate incident, the northern city of Timbuktu experienced an attack on another military base. The army said it neutralized 13 attackers during the assault. The attack also involved shelling near the airport, and heavy gunfire was heard in the area. The military added that it foiled an attempt by terrorist fighters to infiltrate the Timbuktu camp. They arrested 31 suspected terrorists. The army praised the quick response of their forces in repulsing the attackers. Now we move on to Sudan. Britain's Foreign Secretary David Lammy called Sudan the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe. He warned that the country is in deep crisis after more than 2 years of war. The conflict between Sudan's regular army and the Rapid Support Forces has killed tens of thousands and displaced 13 million people. That's almost a quarter of the country's population. Infrastructure has been severely damaged, and famine has struck several regions. Lammy criticized the lack of global attention to the crisis, saying the Western world has been ambivalent and indifferent. He promised to use his position to raise awareness and urge the international community to act. His remarks came during an event in Morocco hosted by the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.